So this presentation is really about some of the strange ways Lucene queries are interpreted if you're using the default Lucene query parser. And I don't think many people are aware of this, and the too long don't read version of this is always use brackets. So we'll have a look at some examples of where this breaks down. So in this scenario, we're doing a search for patents, we're using patent data, and we're looking for examples of where MySQL has been used with either Elasticsearch or Kibana. So it's a fairly straightforward query. It's got 3 clauses. And for brevity's sake, we'll use the terms E, K, and M to represent Elasticsearch, Kibana, and MySQL in the queries we have. So the data that we have is from lens.org. You can go to their website and run these queries on there and see the behavior. So roughly there are 162 Elasticsearch or patents that mention Elasticsearch in the title. There's 394 that mention MySQL in the title. There's only 2 that contain both of those terms, and there's only 1 patent which references Kibana in the title, and that mentions neither Elasticsearch or MySQL. So that's the data that we're querying, and if we have 2 clauses, pretty straightforward, E and M, then we get 2 results back, which is the intersection of E and M, so that works perfectly fine. Equally, if we search for E or M, we get back both those circles there, all the Elasticsearch documents, all the MySQL documents, and that works absolutely fine too. The problems come when you start to have ands and ors in the same query clause and you're not using brackets. So this is ambiguous, essentially. There is no standard in the world of search as to how ands and ors take precedence over each other, like operator precedence. So it can be surprising moving from one website to another that they behave differently. And most people don't know what the precedence is anyway, so it's a bit confusing as to what might actually happen when you run this query. And it is actually surprising because it's not what you expect either. So one reasonable assumption would be that it puts brackets around the M and the E. In this case, we're looking for either Kibana documents or Elasticsearch and MySQL. So if the search engine interpreted it that way, that would be justifiable, should we say. So another reasonable interpretation of this query, and perhaps the one we were looking for, is to look for either Elasticsearch or Kibana used in conjunction with MySQL, with the AND. And unfortunately, the way the Lucene query parser works, it does neither of these things. It does neither of these interpretations that you would expect. So this query is ambiguous, and the brackets could go either to the left or to the right in these examples. And the way Lucene works in its configuration, as you can find on lens.org, is it actually does neither of these things. It does something completely different to what you would expect here in terms of Boolean syntax. So what does it do? Well, it actually matches M. It matches all of the MySQL documents, and it doesn't narrow it down at all. You get all of them, regardless of whether they use Elasticsearch or Kibana or not. So in a way, that's matching too much, and the reason why is that Lucene has a sort of strange way of interpreting Boolean syntax. It has these bool operators, which consist of must clauses, should clauses, must not clauses, and so on. And the behavior is, if you have a single Boolean query and it has a single must clause in it, then all of your should clauses become relegated to a optional nice to have type of clause, which is just used for boosting search results to the top, but it will leave you with a long tail of matches which are perhaps not what you're looking for. So E or K in this query, if we're just exporting all of the results that match this query, is largely redundant because we're just going to get all of M, and we could have just as well have done a search for M. So that's perhaps not what you're thinking or expecting as a search result. Now, if you flip the order on some of these things, you actually get something different again. So we can take the same query, M and E or K, and maybe we'd express the E or K bit first, and we put E or K and M. And in that scenario, we get no results at all. And again, this is down to the sort of the strangeness of the Boolean query in Lucene. So the query parser will convert this particular query string into a must clause, which is it must have K and M, because it focused on the right hand side first. And then it said that the E clause was just an or hanging on the side, so that's a should clause. And again, it's got relegated to a clause that has no effect, so we're not matching that big circle of Elasticsearch queries because we haven't satisfied any queries or any documents that match the K and M part of the query. So we have to be very, very careful about the way we use Lucene query syntax when we don't use brackets. There is some strange and unexpected behavior for those people who are familiar with Boolean syntax from other systems and so on, and it's doing a slightly strange thing, and you have to be quite careful and use brackets to introduce child Boolean clauses. If a Boolean clause only has should clauses in it and no must clauses, then it behaves like a regular or, so you need to basically wrap true ors in a Boolean query to get it to work, which involves the use of brackets and so on. So the summary is always use brackets or a better user interface, and that's part of what I've been working on, is to try and actually bring some transparency to what goes on behind the scenes when we type all these phrases and keywords into our search boxes. So an alternative interface which allows us to see exactly how the search engine is matching is using the and/or components that I've been working on, the search interface. So we still have the text for data entry, so we can type in MySQL and Elasticsearch, and we can see how the clauses are arranged from left to right in a sort of and if we were to add an or Kibana, we can see how that's added as an option below Elasticsearch. We can go across the page from left to right, matching MySQL, then followed by Elasticsearch or Kibana. It's a two-way interface, so if I change the text to MySQL and Elasticsearch or Kibana, then we see the graphical representation of how that looks. So we can see, for example, that we have a channel MySQL and Elasticsearch or Kibana. If that's not what we want, then we can change graphically what we want to see, and that reflects in the text. So we can drag that to the right here and rearrange these clauses to our heart's content. So one of the other things that we like to do to be transparent about how the query is performing and executing is there is an option to have a profiler which will tell you about the behavior of each of the clauses in your search. So you can see just how many documents match the first stage, the MySQL, and then you can see the breakdown of how the next stage is actually performing a filter. So we can see, for example, here that the clause Kibana isn't actually matching anything. It's not doing any work for us here because there are no patents in this data set that both match MySQL and Kibana. So we might as well remove that from our query, and we can refine and understand fully how the query is working, the logic behind it, and how it's performing as a match.